Hello and welcome back to another video, and tonight we are going to talk about something which most people don't seem to pay a lot of attention to, which is the art of conversation. Sometimes when we're trying to connect with another person, when we're trying to speak to another person, we really do forget that most human communication all boils down to good conversations. Problems in communication tends to happen when we disregard guidelines or rules for a good conversation, and it is really interesting how we are so used to speaking, we're so used to talking to people that we sometimes forget that we're even doing this conversation thing, or sometimes we even forget that there are guidelines and rules for a very productive and useful conversation. So in today's video, my aim is to give you a few tips and guidelines for a very stimulating conversation so you can be the most interesting person at a party, or you can really drag a conversation into a 4-hour really in-depth conversation with someone you care about. Before I dive into the rules, here's a little digression into history. The streets of Paris in the 17th century were littered with salons, and these are not salons where you go to get your haircuts, but these were elite gatherings where the hosts would invite the leading scientists, philosophers, poets, literary figures into one room for them to cultivate this art of conversation. Despite the fact that these were very much intellectually charged environments, these guests at the salons had zero tolerance for anything boring. A guest could be talking about the leading developments in poetry, philosophy, or anything fancy, but if they failed to capture the audience's attention, they were immediately booed off the stage because these audience is a pretty tough crowd to please. They both wanted intellectual stimulation as well as, well, amusement. So among these groups of people who were extremely hard to please, philosophers and poets and these literary figures really had to devise some inventive ways to communicate their insights without coming off as boring. And one of these last was the 17th century moralist François Duc de la Rochefoucauld. This man was perhaps one of the most cultured members out of the entire memberships of the salon. He dazzled his guests with short paragraphs and short aphorisms instead of long-winded lectures. And as his reputation grew in the salons, La Rochefoucauld compiled all of his maxims and aphorisms together into one short book. And this book is still so close to French people's heart that Voltaire even said that this book should be memorized and committed to heart. And in one of the entries from this book, La Rochefoucauld laid out his best practices for a good conversation after spending so many years in these salons. So I think sometimes it's rather useful for us to take some lessons from wise people of the past, and today we're going to use La Rochefoucauld's advice for this topic of conversation. Just a bit of a side note, if you want to read these rules and if you want these rules to be laid out for you, this is also a written post on my Substack, which you can check out from my description. And now here are 10 rules from Mr. La Rochefoucauld to help us with our conversations. Rule number 1. Listen to those who speak if we want to be listened to. Pretty self-explanatory. If you lack the ability to really listen to what the other person's saying, on the one hand, you might not even get a chance to talk. Or on another hand, if you're just too focused on yourself, the other person's gonna think you're a bore. Number 2, avoid arguing with indifferent things and avoid asking useless questions. And this tip is really just another way of saying, wait for your turn to speak and be very patient with the other person. And a good conversation can only occur when both parties are comfortable with waiting for their turns. Number 3, converse cordially according to the mood of the room. We've all met people who are either too serious or too loosey-goosey for the mood of the conversation, so read the mood before you speak. Number 4, one must avoid talking for a long time about oneself. No one likes self-absorbed monologues, which is why a lot of people find Hamlet especially insufferable. Number 5, let people reach their own conclusions. When you're trying to persuade someone, instead of just jamming that point down their throat, you want to gently guide this person to their own conclusions, and this guiding process should make the person feel like they've reached that conclusion themselves. Number 6, never speak with airs of authority or use words and terms that are bigger than things. Then again, if you don't want to come off as a snob or a bore, take this rule to heart. Number 7, retain opinions that might hurt the feelings of others. In today's world, we prize authenticity, or we prize being extremely blunt with another person. We prize just getting to the point, and this hyper-efficiency sometimes could really hurt other people. So if we really want to convince another person with our opinions, there are more artful ways to disarm the other person before you give them your opinions, instead of just guiding the entire thing into a shouting match. So temporarily, keep those really sharp opinions to yourself, and once the guards are down for a little bit, maybe you can put those opinions in there and help the other person to understand your point of view. Number 8, It is dangerous to always want to be the master of the conversation. A good conversation is kind of a synergistic dance between two or more people. Everyone should have an equal part in this little dance, and no one should really claim the entire dance floor unless he wants to be a bore. Number 9, remain silent if there's nothing to say. If you don't have anything to say, don't try to fill up the room with just useless words, and maybe sometimes shutting up is the best policy. And number 10, practice the art of silence. Quote, "There's an eloquent silence. It sometimes serves to approve and to condemn. There's a mocking silence. There's a respectful silence. There are tunes, tricks, and mannerisms." What most people don't realize is that there's actually an art to silence. Different forms of silences can be used to different effects. So experiment around, play around, and use silence to your advantage during a conversation. So those are the rules and guidelines from Mr. Rochefoucauld to help us with our conversations. And in the future, I'm super excited to share more insights or more of these life lessons from history, philosophy, and literature. And the main goal here is to really view history as a gold mine of great insights that we can use nowadays to better our lives. And if you've enjoyed today's video, be sure to check out my Substack newsletter, which is where all of these ideas live. And the entire aim is to gift you these little life lessons from history straight into your inbox. So check that out if that's something you're into. Nevertheless, that's all I have for today's video. Hope you guys are having a great night or a great morning or a great afternoon, wherever you are. Robin Waldun here, and I will see you in the next one. Take care and goodbye.